You can start us off, and Steve's going to run the PowerPoint, so we're good to go.
Thank you very much, Fry. It's nice to see you. I don't think we've actually ever seen each other in person. We just did that one, but it was audio only. Now, oh, now let's start off with what is the Passetto di Borgo? It's an elevated secret passage that links the papal residence in the Vatican City to the Castel San Angelo, and it's about 800 meters long for like the only people who would really need to know this, probably Americans. It's 2,600 feet long, and it's about 10-ish meters high, 8 to 10 meters high. It varies. It's a walkable passage that kind of runs through the walls, and it's located in the Rione of Borgo. And so it's also just called the Passetto, which just means a small passage, or I'd hate to keep butchering Italian, the Corridore di Borgo. Now, here's a little history of the Passetto. Basically, the city of Rome breaks a lot of the rules and precedents that we think of as Roman, such as like regular street patterns. Rome's a warren of streets and alleys that go in every which direction. But Rome is also not built in a very strategic place. Its place along the Tiber River is really wide open and not very defensible. The walls around Rome as well are not particularly well designed or executed against a variety of attacks. And so the Romans, since the Roman Empire and even before, they built walls to protect the city. And the first walls enclosed really small areas, and the walls grew as the city grew. In the late 200s, the city had outgrown its previous walls, and barbarians had actually threatened Rome itself. So a substantial set of walls were started by the Emperor Aurelian. And some of these areas were not the best quality of walls, and that was given the constraints of this highly built up urban area. So many buildings were completely built into the walls. Like there's a famous, I should have probably put a picture of that, but you can easily search it. There's actually a pyramid built into the walls. It's called the Pyramid of Cestius, which is really cool. So that was a cost cutting measure. And this was all predominantly on the east side of the river. There was a small section called I cannot pronounce this word, and I practiced it. Hopefully I get it right. The Trastevere neighborhood is a small neighborhood on the opposite side of the Tiber that was walled, but the area around the Vatican Hill area was completely not walled in. So if you take a peek over at the slideshow, we can show you a little bit of that. It's basically this area here with the red around it. That's more or less the Aurelian walls. But this area up in here is the Vatican City, and it had no walls up to that point. Now, let's just quickly talk about Hadrian's mausoleum, because that's a really important part of this whole thing of the Passetto. It was the burial place of the Emperor Hadrian and several other emperors after that. It was built at the head of the Aelian Bridge, one of the most important bridges leading into Rome. By about the 400s, it was starting to be used as a fortress, but remember, it's a mausoleum. It's not built as a fortress, but such a large building built on such a commanding position and worked well as a fortress in its own way. And it's became rechristened as the Castel San Angelo. Now, there were bits and pieces of defenses added around the Vatican Hill areas as early as the Gothic Wars by the Goth Totila. And Totila built a wall connecting St. Peter's to Hadrian's mausoleum / Castel San Angelo. That wall kind of fell into disrepair over the years, but we can show a little bit of that right in this area. I believe it is this. Oh, we can get a kind of an overview. So in this photo, we're basically standing on the Castel San Angelo, and if you follow this passageway all the way, you'll see St. Peter's Basilica, and that's what takes you directly to the papal residence from. So that's the Passetto right there. Now, by the 800s, it was clear that the Vatican Hill region needed much stronger defenses. The Vatican became obviously an important religious site due to St. Peter's Basilica, and churches were areas where wealth was accumulated, and St. Peter's was just fabulously wealthy. The area around St. Peter's and the Vatican location was the location of many foreign merchants and scholars, particularly a lot of Germanic peoples, Lombards, Franks, Anglo-Saxons. They all lived in this section of town. And they brought in a ton of wealth as well. If you think of King Alfred, he actually lived in this region for a while. So, but being wealthy in the early Middle Ages made this area a big target for raiders. And that now we know the city of Rome proper was protected from the smash and grab raid, but the Vatican was not. And in 852, an Islamic army from the south attacked Rome and stole everything that wasn't nailed down in St. Peter's and the unprotected region around St. Peter's. The various powers who were at play in Rome during the day, think of Pope Leo IV, nobody was really well prepared for this raid, but eventually they did come together. They counterattacked. They got some of the stuff back, but it was still a devastating blow. And they knew at this point it was clear that the Vatican Hill needed to be surrounded by a defensive wall. This new wall, named the Leonine Wall, enclosed a fairly small area just surrounding St. Peter's Basilica and that small neighborhood around it. The wall connecting Castel San Angelo to the bridge that connected it to the areas on the western side of the main Tiber area were completely surrounded. And so this area inside of the new Leonine walls started to become called the Leonine City. And it was also called the Borgo, which, remember all those Germanic people who were living there? They called the area Borgo after their word for a fortified town. If you think of Berg, like Pittsburgh, or all the different burghs in England that were built as fortified towns, they gave them an Italianized name of Borgo. Now we zip forward a couple of hundred years to Nicholas III. He lived in the area, the papacy, his papacy of 1277 to 1280. He enclosed the fighting platform of that original stretch of wall between the papal residence and the Vatican and the Castel San Angelo. There's some argument among scholars, though, when this exactly happened, but by the end of the 1200s leads us to the time when the popes of Rome moved their entire operation to Avignon in the south of France, and it would be almost 100 years before the popes moved back to Rome. When the popes finally did get back to Rome, Rome was not in great shape. The Leonine walls in the Vatican and the surrounding neighborhood, in this Borgo neighborhood, had seen better days and they needed a major facelift. So renovations were done to the Leonine wall, and gates were put through the wall to connect to the growing areas of the city. The wall remained the wall remained, and the passage, and this was very fortunate for the popes that this did remain. And we'll take a quick, this is a really good picture to just get the whole, the whole zoomed in of this. We have the Castel San Angelo, and then the Passetto that goes right to the Papal Palace, and then some of these various walls that were built, and these walls just kept getting built over and over again, as we've seen. But now, so this is a brief background And Bree is going to walk us through a few times where this passetto really came into its intended purpose.
Yes, I will. So, right in 1494, Pope Alexander VI, who's also aka Rodrigo Borgia, he fortified the Passetto. And it was a very, very good thing that he did that, because almost immediately after, he was going to become the first pope who would have to use it for real. If you want to go to the next slide with the pictures, I've got a picture of the people we're going to be talking about. So we have Rodrigo Borgia sitting on the left here, and at the beginning of his papacy, Alexander VI had maintained an alliance with the King of France, pictured here on the right, Charles VIII, particularly in supporting Charles's claims on Naples, which was currently under the control of King Ferdinand I. Then, in early 1494, Ferdinand had died and was succeeded by his son, Alfonso II. And of course, King Charles seizes this moment of shifting power and therefore unstable power to make his move. So he and his 25,000-man army invade Italy, intent on marching all the way down to Naples and banking on the Pope's authorization to pass through Rome in the process. And initially, Pope Alexander did support this move and confirmed it under the guise of, oh, I'm supporting Charles on a crusade against the Ottomans, not going down to Naples to obviously take it over. But as Charles started to get deeper into Italy, passing without resistance through city after city, making some token shows of force and reaping the benefits of the French supporting nobles, this really starts to freak Pope Alexander out. Right? He's getting very nervous. This massive army headed straight for Rome is now a very real prospect. And not all of Charles's allies in Rome are allies of the Pope. So if he's already reaping all these benefits of the French supporting nobles, if they get to Rome and they start, making any moves against the Pope, he's screwed. He also began to consider the incredible power and influence that Charles would have if he succeeded in Naples, because he'd be bookending Italy between his two territories. And this makes Alexander panic. And instead of shoring up his alliance with Charles, he turns around and recognizes Alfonso as the rightful and legitimate king of Naples, seeking an alliance with him and retracting all of his support of Charles's claims. And of course, this goes about as well as you would think. French supporting nobles in Italy immediately made moves against the Pope, taking cities where they had the most influence in the name of the French. And Charles kept coming. He was already en route, and he was already authorized to enter the city. And now he has a bone to pick with Pope Alexander. And the Pope is now freaking out, and he appeals to his other allies and even reaches out to the Ottomans, hoping that they will support him against the fury he knows Charles is now going to rain down upon him, and he receives no help at all. Now, on December 31st, 1494, Charles enters Rome with very little resistance. The forces in place to protect the city were vastly outnumbered and didn't resist because Charles was already irate and they did not want to take his punishment. Charles is in charge. He demanded that the Pope turn over land, hostages, and envoys. And when the Pope refused, Charles allegedly threatened, "My barons will acquaint the Pope with my will." So a statement like that left no illusions in Pope Alexander's mind about diplomacy or getting out of this mess he's made. It's going to be violent coercion, and he knows it. And that's if he gets lucky, because Charles could absolutely depose him on charges of simony. So he has to get out. So on that same night, he made for the Passetto. He took his son, Cesare Borgia, and 4 other cardinals with him, and safely made it to Castel San Angelo, where he locked himself inside. This allowed him to come to terms with Charles at a distance where the threat of force was significantly reduced. Not to mention, the city of Rome grew turbulent rather quickly, and Charles didn't want to stick around and exhaust his army on calming that rabble when he had a kingdom to go win. So he had to make some concessions, and Charles left Rome for Naples. And at that point, by the way, Alfonso II had abdicated and fled, so Charles was crowned King of Naples pretty handily, but only temporarily. Only for a little bit. And as soon as Charles was out of such dangerous proximity, Pope Alexander formed the Holy League with the Holy Roman Emperor and Venice and Milan and Ferdinand of Spain to force Charles back out of Italy. So, job done there. Now, I think it's the next slide, if you want to click over. Perfect. Okay, so the most famous use of the Passetto of all time occurred during the sack of Rome in 1527. And this is where, in every way, the Pope's secret escape route was absolutely 100% the difference between life or death. So, first, let's contextualize this very famous, very brutal invasion of Rome. In the early 16th century, Spain was a massive rising power under the new Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, the Habsburg. And Charles is so in charge here. Because aside from being the emperor, he was also the King of Spain, the Archduke of Austria, and Lord of the Netherlands. So his territory is massive, he has an extensive army, and this army is fortified with various mercenary contingents, so he is the most in charge. He then conquered the territory of King Francis of France, including holding Francis himself for ransom in the Italian Wars. So this means that Charles, who has everything, now also has a fairly secure foothold to broach Italy and the Papal States. So Pope Clement VII, also known as Giulio de' Medici, along with the leaders of Florence, Venice, Milan, and the French king, all decide to ally against Charles in a pact called the League of Cognac. And this deeply offends Emperor Charles, who up until this point had been in a very close alliance with Pope Clement and even supported his election during a very contentious conclave. And by the way, the French king that the Pope is now allying with was on the opposite side of that conclave and didn't want him to be Pope in the first place. Interesting choices. These popes are not necessarily picking their allies here. So the Pope now joining a league with the French king, who was against him first, against Charles, who was with him, is perceived as a huge political betrayal. And this results in the perfect storm of events. Charles was furious with the Pope for breaking their long-standing alliance and was determined to retaliate by having the Pope deposed. He also happened to have an army of 35,000 soldiers and mercenaries who, after the Battle of Pavia, were looking a little mutinous and looking to be paid, which was not something that Charles could do in the moment. So, given that the majority of the mercenaries in his army were Landsknecht Germans with Lutheran/Protestant sympathies, and they were really big on killing churchmen and the idea of destroying the Holy See, Charles decides to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He marches his army to Rome, declares the city as spoils of war, and turned loose his soldiers to gorge themselves on treasure and blood. Can you click the next slide, Steve? Perfect. So the result was devastating. All Pope Clement had at this time to protect the city of Rome was a militia of about 5,000 men and 189 Swiss guards. That's all he has against 35,000 frenzied soldiers with absolutely no limits. So, no, no, it's not going to go well. So, homes and churches are looted and destroyed. Monks and priests are killed indiscriminately. Nuns were violated. Violence was everywhere. People were thrown into the Tiber or out of windows, including children. The nobility were held hostage for obscene ransoms on their lives or the maintenance of their body parts. Uh, Various eyewitnesses, like Francesco Guicciardini and Jacopo Buonaparte, tell us of streets full of extracted eyes, severed noses, and testicles. In this battle, they loved testicles. Streets full of testicles. Yeah. And all of this is getting started while the Pope was conducting Mass at St. Peter's. He had no idea that this was happening. And it quickly becomes very, very clear to Pope Clement that if mercenaries get their hands on him, he's not going to be taken hostage for ransom. He is going to be murdered, strung up, and disemboweled in the streets. Worse still, St. Peter's is a sitting duck. It cannot be defended. But leaving was just as dangerous. The streets are already overrun with violence and testicles. So, the only so many testicles. Yeah, exactly. So the only option for Pope Clement to get out alive is the Passetto. And even then, the mobs have to be held off long enough for the Pope to get there and get far enough down the Passetto in order to make it to the Castel in time before they're completely overwhelmed. And this leads to the famous last stand of the Swiss Guards. Because remember, all the Pope has to defend himself is 189 Swiss Guards. So 42 guards were sent along with the Pope down the Passetto to guard him. And remember, the Passetto is open, so the Pope was seen as he's making his escape, and he was fired on. And if you go to the Passetto today, you can still see the hook marks on the wall where they were trying to get him. Nope, it's there. It's history. It's beautiful. So the other 147 guards stayed at St. Peter's to hold the mob back long enough for the Pope to get to the Castel. And those ones were slaughtered to an absolute man. Even the guard captain, who had been severely wounded and carried to his house nearby, was tracked down and cut to pieces in front of his wife. They were leaving no stone unturned. They were quite literally torn apart. But they held the mobs off long enough for the Pope to be safely secured in the Castel San Angelo. Over 1,000 people were killed in the Vatican area that day, and St. Peter's Basilica was plundered and destroyed. The population of Rome went from 55,000 people down to about 10,000 because the rest were either killed or had fled. But the Pope had not been taken and had not been killed. This is not to say that it was over. The Pope was effectively a prisoner in the Castel, and the raiding continued until huge ransoms were paid, including the Pope basically paid a ransom for himself. But getting to the Passetto kept him alive and defended long enough to eventually be smuggled out of the city. So again, job done. So this brings us kind of to the end of where we are in our talking points. Fry's going to wrap us up with a quick couple facts before we do questions.
Absolutely. This one?
Yes.
Okay.
You could even do a night tour.
Ooh. Classic Dan Brown style.
Yeah. Also classic Dan Brown style. Back and forth. So yeah, that concludes our talking presentation. We actually completed on time, so we
Yeah,
have time for questions. I see two questions in the chat. So the first one is from Margaret Harden, who says, when were the papal armies created, and did they start as a defensive force? The answer to that is essentially, at this point, the papal states were established roughly around the time of Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th century. So an army was naturally required because the pope starts becoming a secular ruler with secular lands to defend. So they are a defensive force. The Swiss Guards are an entirely other organization, specifically to be the bodyguards of the Pope. That comes a little bit later, in about the 16th century, based on hiring mercenaries for something just like this.
Yeah, I would yeah, it was really an evolving thing for sure. Like you said, as the popes became a secular leader as well as religious, which is happening at about the time of Leo the Fourth, then they're necessarily gaining armies, and then as time goes by, that whole institution evolves.
Yeah. So Marco asks, it's a pity what happened to the Borgo in the 20th century. Do you want to tell that story to the listeners? That is too modern for my sensibilities. So, Steve, do you know?
I quickly looked it up, and I had known a little bit about this time period. It looks like it was a massive urban renewal project where they tore down a lot of the old buildings to put in new stuff. Maybe Marco can join us in a meeting room to explain that further, but it looks like a pretty classic early 20th century tear down all the old stuff to put up new stuff. And it was something that was planned between Mussolini and the Pope at that time. So the good old fashioned, let's tear down all that old stuff and build new stuff that probably isn't the best looking, but it's new.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So Graham Rule asks, all the tales of gore and testicles were presumably written by the eventual winners. Do you think they may have been overstated? Funnily enough, the testicles bit were actually written. So Guicciardini and the Jacopo Bonaparte, they were actually just emissaries. They were ambassadors that happened to be in the city or happened to be in the city shortly after. Could it have been overstated? Yeah, totally. That being said, this is one of the most this is, if not the most violent incursion that happened in terms of sacking Rome. It is one of the most famous since like the 400s. So it seems on par, especially because they had such a religious fervent hatred for destroying the Holy See and destroying the Pope. They came in and they were going to take everything that they wanted.
That's interesting too. That's around the time of the 30 Years' War, where it's just massive carnage everywhere. And it's really, that seems to be about the end of sacking, where you just destroy everything and loot everything and kill everything. It doesn't quite happen as often after that, and the whole 30 Years' War, which is definitely a good thing.
So Matt Breen says, if you were visiting this area, what would be a must-see? Well, this is very central Rome. It's that Vatican region and the Castel. I think the Castel is definitely worth a look, because not only are you going to get the Roman history out of it as the mausoleum of Hadrian, but it was also a fortress for popes for centuries. So there's so much papal history there. It tends to be less crowded than the Vatican museums, but do not skip the Vatican museums. So
I found, having only visited Rome once, hopefully again someday soon, it seems like a really place to just get lost. Like, don't set, or at least have some time where you just go and you'll find things that you just can't even imagine you'll find without even, or set your goal for something. That was something that happened to us. We said we're going to go to the Trevi Fountain. We didn't find the Trevi Fountain, but we saw like 30 other really awesome things. I think that's what and probably really I like doing that anywhere I go, is just maybe have a couple of places in mind, but also get lost too. And Rome has a lot of places to get lost in.
And my favorite weird sort of landmark in Rome is there is a church. It's called the Church of San Francesca Romana, and it has the legendary knee prints of Saint Peter out front, which is not something you hear a lot about. But they're just basically indentations in the pavement where apparently Saint Peter kneeled and it left its mark, and it is just so weird, and I love it.
Oh, another one is it's off of the Forum, and I recall walking down a really steep hill, but it's the Carcere, the prison where they kept Vercingetorix and Paul. And it's literally a hole in the wall on the side. And if you really weren't paying attention, you'd probably miss it walking by. That's a really cool sight.
Yeah, I love that one. Caroline asks, Trastevere, best thing to eat?
I don't have a
I wouldn't say that Trastevere is the best place for food, but I did eat at a nice restaurant there. But again, if I'm going to Rome, I had some of the best pasta all'arrabbiata in Rome, which was my answer in the last panel. But it is really, really great. The student district of San Lorenzo is one of the best places that you can eat in Rome. So go there instead of Trastevere.
One thing I think Rome is known for, and it's from the Jewish influence in Rome, is stuffed zucchini leaves or stuffed zucchini flowers, which I did not have there, but I had afterwards. And they are absolutely delicious.
I love that we've started a debate about food in the chat here.
Yeah.
Okay, make sure I didn't miss any. Margaret asks, it's strange to think of the whole order of Europe is about to be flipped over by the Age of Discovery. How disruptive was the New World to 16th century popes? That's a whole episode. I mean, that's a huge topic. They're very, very, very involved with how the New World plays out with the Treaty of Tordesillas, with the whole scale agreement to allow people to be slaughtered and enslaved in the name of missionizing. So much there. It's disruptive, and yet will also benefit them tremendously. It just changes everything, I think.
I think it's not as much disruptive as it changes what the popes have to do, because you think that 1517, that's when the Reformation starts, and it's not as big of the Reformation is not as big of a blow as it could have been had those lands not been found. I think that it's very possible that the Reformation spreads a lot further, and because the vast amount of wealth that comes in that makes the Spanish be able to fight so effectively in Germany, and all those wars that come in the later 1500s and the 1600s, it completely changes the balance and the trajectory of where history could have gone otherwise, and it kind of changes the focus of the religion. When those areas in Europe, they're gaining converts hugely across the whole world, and it just changes the whole the balance of power, you might say, or just the focus. It's a and it's the how do I say it? The it just keeps the influences go back and forth between the new world and then the old world. And it's just
Feedback loop.
it's so crazy that it would happen. The Reformation happens only about 25 years after the voyage of Columbus. It's that those two monumental things happen so close together.
We have like 1 minute left if we have a final question, because we're going to end on time so that everybody can get in here and do what they need to do. But while we're waiting to see if there's another question, thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
We got a thanks from Dad Pod. Thanks, Dad Pod. All right, I think we're gonna call it there then, so then the next presenters can get in. If you want to continue this conversation, I'm actually going to be moderating another panel, but maybe Steve, if you want to jump into the meeting room.
I'll jump over to a meeting room for a few minutes. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. We'll talk to you soon, hopefully. Bye.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.